This is AI gone wrong, guys. I've got this wonderful new webcam, but it has AI gesture recognition. And sometimes I think it thinks that I'm telling it to zoom in just by my hand gestures. Cool.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode. Industry insiders having frank debates about the latest tech, politics, and business news. Whether you're a founder, investor, or operator in a startup, you'll gain insights into how current events connect to broader themes and trends that impact your startup, your investments, and your day-to-day operational decisions. The conversation starts now.
Hi, I'm Emil Michael.
And I'm Yaniv Bernstein. Welcome to TSP Reacts. Today, it's just me and Emil. Chris will be back next week, but we've got a packed agenda for you, full of the latest news in tech. We're going to be talking about NVIDIA's massive earnings beat. We're going to be talking about xAI, Elon Musk's AI company, raising a $6 billion seed round. We're going to talk about Google's funny search results. And finally, we ask Emil, an experienced investor, how he's thinking about all the different AI startups and how he makes his investment decisions. So lots to discuss, lots for founders to learn right after this break. This episode of the Startup Podcast is brought to you by Vanta. I get it. You hear security and compliance and you think time-consuming and stressful, but it's critical for scaling your business. Achieving compliance with ISO 27001, SOC 2, Essential 8, or other in-demand frameworks can unlock major growth for your company, help you sell to the enterprise, and establish customer trust. And with Vanta, you can get compliant in weeks instead of months and save up to 85% of associated costs. And just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast. Okay, Emil, just before we jump in, we need to talk about the Startup Podcast Pact. One of the things that's been really exciting lately is we've been growing like crazy on YouTube, especially with these Reacts episodes. So we've got a special ask for all of you here listening to Reacts. Whether you watch us on YouTube or not, we would love it if you go to our channel, which you can find by searching on YouTube or going to tsp.show and subscribe to us on YouTube. That tells the YouTube gods that we are doing the right thing, shows the podcast to more people there, and it's just a wonderful way for more founders and more tech folks to find us. So this takes no time at all. Go to YouTube, find our channel, hit subscribe. That is all. Can we make you pay? No, this is an honor system, but you're an honorable person. I know that. So go ahead, honor the TSP Pact, and then you can get back to the show. Okay, so the first thing we wanted to talk about today, Emil, is NVIDIA again. They did their quarterly results, and once more, they beat estimates. So they have been on an historic tear. I think no company of its size has been growing this fast for this long. And investors have baked that into their estimates. And despite that, NVIDIA has beaten those estimates and just come in with a massive, massive quarter. So what do you think about that?
I mean, holy cow. Like, I don't know how, especially with a company where they produce something that's supply constrained. I don't know how they beat something that much more, because I'm sure all these Wall Street people calculate how many chips can possibly be produced and they still underestimate it. It's really quite stunning. I don't know if they're surge pricing it or what they're doing, but what a juggernaut. I mean, to be worth $2.5 trillion, more than the entire German stock market. And to be up there now with Google, Microsoft, way above Facebook is really quite extraordinary, And then they have orders for years out. So just quite a story. It's sort of hard to comprehend.
That's interesting that you say they have orders for years out, because I think one of the big questions, of course, is can it last? Is this the beginnings of a kind of a bubble? And I think one of the comparisons when I read other news, listen to other podcasts, is they talk about NVIDIA maybe being the Cisco of the AI wave, right? Which is like back during the dot-com boom, what happened is the internet itself, the infrastructure of the internet was growing. There were all of these startups, and no one knew what the future of the internet would be exactly, except that it would be big. And so a lot of investors just defaulted to saying, okay, Cisco is building the hardware that powers the internet. So no matter what happens, they can't lose. And in a sense, that was true, right? Cisco's still alive and kicking today, but they bid up the price of the company way beyond what it was worth. And basically, Cisco has never again reached its all-time high. It reached in like 2000 or whenever it was. And I guess the question is, every analogy breaks at some point. Like, how valid is this comparison to NVIDIA?
I guess I have less of a worry that we're trending toward an overcapacity problem like we did with the laying of fiber networks and the need for routers like we did in the Cisco internet days. And more of a worry that just the valuation itself, even if all the orders came in, just assumes sort of a curve that would be hard to imagine in almost any scenario when you look 5-7 years out. Like to go from a couple $100 billion company to $2.5 trillion in less than a year just feels like bubblicious, and
it does. I mean, it's the third most valuable company on earth now.
I worry about the valuation, not necessarily that they're overbuilding capacity like they overbuilt fiber networks for the internet and all the other stuff. But yes, the Cisco analogy is an interesting one to think about. The other difference here is like, my understanding is there are other router companies that were technologically behind Cisco, but not as far behind as the difference between NVIDIA and the next best provider of what they do.
There are a few interesting questions baked into that, right? So first of all, yes, you talk about the valuation and, the earnings multiple, I think, is around 45 at the moment for NVIDIA, which is higher than Google, higher than Apple, way higher than the overall stock market. So that implies, yes, continued explosive growth. Will that happen? Then there's a question of how deep their moat is, as you say, Emil, and it's for someone who's outside that really deep tech of that industry, it's hard to tell, but the consensus seems to be, as you say, Emil, that it's fairly deep and it will take a while for anybody else to catch up. But the other question for me, as you point out, you say you don't think there's going to be the overcapacity, and that's less clear to me. It's a bit of a gold rush right now, and the question is how much processing, how much compute is necessary to bring valuable commercial outcomes to AI. There's a couple of reasons why I'm not convinced that there won't be that overcapacity problem. The first is that AI is becoming more computationally efficient at the software layer, right? There are better training models that's being optimized. There are better compilers. And so even just compute for compute, you can train a model more cheaply than you could a year ago. The second thing is models at any given size are becoming more effective. So there's all this like software layer optimization that's happening. And then the third thing is it's not that clear that everywhere that AI is being rolled out will actually deliver value. And so there's a possibility that some companies, especially more traditional, less sort of tech-forward companies, might actually pull back on their AI investment. And so I do think there's a sense of like everything has to keep going right for NVIDIA to stay airborne like this. And it's just not clear to me how much AI capacity is needed.
I agree with you on the software optimizations. There's going to be tons of optimizations for sure. Let's like bake that in. The difference in the first internet wave was it was highly speculative based on people using the internet at a pace that they thought was going to be greater than it actually turned up to be. This side is a little bit more marketplace, meaning one could argue the more compute capacity that's available, the more sophisticated applications that people will deploy that do deeper, more interesting stuff. Whereas before, it was just like server capacity, like launching internet sites. The complexity of the site didn't sort of change based on capacity, where the number of GPUs you have available might determine how sophisticated the applications you can serve consumers are. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I mean, it might. And I think that's an interesting question. So you talked about the fiber build out in particular, which is really interesting because internet speeds have become an interesting thing where when internet was 10 megabit, people would say, you'll never need 50. When it was 50, people said you'd never need 100. And when it was 100, people said you never need a gigabit. They were wrong until they were right. Like, I don't think anybody needs home 10 gigabit networking, right? It doesn't seem to make a difference. So you kind of top out where you're like, we have that consumer surplus. We have as much as we need. I know it's ironic, Emil, right now, my internet connection's a bit flaky, but the truth is if you've got gigabit fiber, you are good. You've been good for the last 10 years. And so is there an AI or a GPU equivalent of that where it's like, you're a big company, you've got access to whatever many GPUs and that'll do for your use case? Or, as you say, is it a question of, or a case of more is better nearly indefinitely? The more compute you have to throw at this, the better your models. And I don't know enough.
We're certainly not at that plateau now.
No, we're not. We're not. Absolutely not. I think the question is how much growth is baked in, right?
Right. And if there's robots running around your house in a few years, you may need more than a gigabit at home. Like, again, it's hard to predict the future here, but we're like at the very beginning of the AI revolution. And at least at this moment, even when you hear from the safety people who left OpenAI, one of the complaints was they couldn't get enough allocation of compute, right? This is one of the biggest AI companies in the world that has access to Microsoft Azure. Now, this is very early days, but like if they have a problem getting compute, how much does that trickle down to everyone else in the world? And that's like with a whole bunch of countries in the world that haven't yet even started.
I'm somewhat playing the devil's advocate. I think extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And in a sense, a $2.5 trillion valuation is an extraordinary claim by the market about the ongoing value of NVIDIA and AI. And so it's like, wow, a lot of things have to go right to justify that. But like it is an incredible story, an incredible corporate story of incredible execution, great timing, great strategy that finds NVIDIA where it is. So, fair play to them. It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, look, if it was as easy to analogize historically, this looks like that, so be wary. The stock would sort of incorporate that into its price, right? In theory.
Yeah.
So
in theory,
it comes down to an opinion, and I think it's helpful to look at the analogs, but not determinative. And when I look at the analogs, I feel that it's different because my belief is that the computational power is a limiting factor on innovation right now in a way that I didn't feel that was the case back then.
Which is, I think, a good segue. Talking about demand for NVIDIA's products, I thought we could talk about xAI, Elon Musk's AI company, having just raised $6 billion, no doubt much of which is going to go straight into NVIDIA's pockets. That's a lot of money for a seed round. What do you think about xAI? And I guess my question, going beyond the sort of Elon effect, is what is their competitive positioning compared to all of the other kind of AI foundation companies out there?
I think that we talked about unique data sets, and let's assume for a second that they will have access in some way to Twitter's data set, X's data set. Let's assume that they'll have access to Tesla's data set. Those are unique and interesting and large. Let's assume that also they'll have Elon's ability to actually build his own data centers and things like that, which may be shared infrastructure across all of those three companies. So there may be actually some cost advantages there. And cost does matter in these things, given the amount of cost it takes to build some of these foundation models. That makes it compelling. And remember, Elon was a co-founder of OpenAI, so it's not like he doesn't understand the promise of AI. And then the fourth thing I'd add, which is a little bit left out of the conversation, is Optimus Prime, the robot that's being built. I think it's under the Tesla brand, which could be an AI-controlled humanoid robot, which is another yet application of what this AI could do. So in some ways, it's like, can Elon do a little bit more of AI applied to the physical world, whether it be cars or humanoids, rockets, I don't know. But it's a definitely unique angle on this, and he's certainly a thinker. Now he's got how many more companies to run, so that's a risk that comes with some benefit. But, there is some there.
Yeah, there is some there. I mean, one thing that's interesting about all this is the corporate structure is definitely getting messy. So it's worth noting that xAI is a separate company from X, formerly known as Twitter, is a separate company from Tesla. And I think there are some governance questions, but we can leave those to one side because I think we've done a lot of that discussion about Elon before. But I think we can assume, especially given that xAI is private and X is private, and Tesla is in a lot of ways run like a private company by Elon, it's very founder-led, that yes, there will be this data sharing and that in a lot of ways they will act as a single entity or as a closely allied set of entities. So I agree with that. So thinking about, how does xAI fit into X, how does it fit into Tesla, makes a lot of sense. I think there is really just the Elon effect here. And, what I think about is actually not X or even Tesla. I'm thinking about SpaceX and a little bit the great man theory. I know I hang a lot of shit on Elon, but I also have acknowledged and continue to acknowledge his brilliance in creating these entirely new companies or these new sectors that didn't exist before and revolutionizing cars, revolutionizing space transport. It's not like there weren't rocket companies before SpaceX. He had a better strategy and better execution. Can he do the same with AI? You've been out the last couple of weeks, Emil, but we have been talking a little bit about OpenAI and how they're not in as strong a position as one might imagine, right? OpenAI, again, if we're going to reach back to, the Internet 1.0 boom, could end up being the Netscape of AI, right? Like a really important footnote in history. But if they can't lock in the distribution and so on, then they might not be such a big deal in 10 years. So I think there is some really interesting strategy stuff around AI. And if I could figure out exactly what Elon would be doing with this, then I'd be Elon, except I'm nicer. But this thing is valued, I think it was 18 billion pre-money on this raise. So definitely there are a lot of people who are backing this. And I would say that valuation is basically a valuation on Elon Musk being able to do something different and unique within the AI space.
Yeah. I mean, look, he has many ways to distribute this with his own distribution channels. I think OpenAI has built a brand already that has some distributive power. They have a Microsoft partnership.
So did Netscape, though.
No, they got blocked. That was the whole lawsuit with Microsoft, is they couldn't distribute.
No, but they had
Microsoft's
distributive power.
OS.
They had an incredible brand back then. People loved Netscape.
Yeah, but at the time when Microsoft included Internet Explorer as default on OS, whatever their latest Windows version was, that was like a big problem for Netscape. There was a different construct and distribution. I think for OpenAI, which you can download from the App Store, people are used to downloading from the App Store. I don't think it's a thing. I think it's just a lot of money, and you're competing with Google that's got infinite balance sheet effectively. You're competing with part of Microsoft that's now doing their own AI thing as a hedge that's got infinite money and infinite cloud computing power, right? And Google Cloud. And so you have like really, really serious competitors. Now, one, it's hard to argue that OpenAI has not been the most innovative. They have been the most innovative in terms of actually producing product that people seem to want or seem to be interested in and compelling. And that matters. So does that lead grow? Does that lead shrink? I don't know. Like Google released AI summaries. They seem to like be fine. And maybe just everyone just likes to dump on Google. I don't know. But, Sam's certainly winning the PR war.
Let's come back to that Google thing because I think that's interesting. But just to wrap up my thoughts on xAI and interested in your response is, like I said, I think this is fundamentally an Elon Musk bet that these investors are making. I think this is about what can Elon do that others can't do. Yes, he has access to data and he's got access to capital, but like you said, he has very well-funded competitors who have locked up a lot of the best talent. So what can Elon do? And my question is, which Elon is going to show up? Are we going to get SpaceX and Tesla Elon, or are we going to get Twitter Elon? Because, you may perhaps disagree, Emil, but I don't think that Elon has to date proved to be a strategic genius in operating Twitter the same way he has in operating Tesla or SpaceX. So which guy's going to show up to run this company?
I mean, look, Tesla and SpaceX were not overnight successes. They took a long time to work, and I think Twitter will work in the long term. I think Twitter does have a little bit more of a political kind of mission or ideological mission for Elon. It's not just about making the company worth 10 times as much as what he bought it. It's also about his set of principles as it comes to free speech. He's happy to sacrifice some portion of profit motive for it. xAI probably has a mixed set of motives as well, because he's talked a lot about open versus closed. He's talked a lot about free speech as it relates to OpenAI and not being a censored AI. He's made fun of some of the Gemini sort of outputs that have been, wokeified. So it might be a mixed sort of thing as well, but not purely a profit motive. But, he has been thinking about this for over a decade, and he was like pretty much the sole financing person and co-founder of OpenAI. So I do think this is not sort of I should just do this because thing, where one could argue like Twitter came out of nowhere for him.
Here's the thing. If you look at Tesla and SpaceX, like they have such clearly articulated strategies and they were publicly articulated. They study this shit in business school, right? I'm just reading the new Richard Rummelt book. He talks about how clear SpaceX's strategy was. And it's the same with Tesla. X's strategy, in my view, is not clear. Like you said, there's a bit of ideology, a bit of principle built into that. It's not clear to me what xAI's strategy is, but it does appear that when you look at Elon's most successful companies, they actually have a very well-articulated strategy that is easy for people who are not Elon Musk to understand. And then they execute on it like maniacs, right? Like Tesla, starting with a Roadster, going from up market to down market. That'd never been tried with EVs before. SpaceX, it's like, oh, okay, the major cost is the rockets. Let's figure out how to get these bastards to be reusable. Like, they've actually followed very simple strategies, and the genius has been in the execution. So what is xAI's simple strategy? I'd love to know that.
It's a seed round, so I'm sure we'll hear more about that.
We will
soon, right? I do know open versus closed, which is a debate in the AI community right now. He's taken sides on that, and censored, not censored, safe, not. But interestingly, and this is something I know you will appreciate, Elon's been talking about open, but he's also been very consistent that he believes AI is a threat to humanity. on the safety side, which is ironic given what you'd think he might align with. So that's an interesting sort of combo there.
There's an internal contradiction, and actually, without wanting to get too deep into the AI gossip, which I know we fall into sometimes, there's been a bit of beef on Twitter between Elon and Jan LeCun, who's, one of the theoretical fathers of LLMs. He works at Meta, he's like their chief scientist or whatever, and Jan LeCun kind of threw shade at Elon. He's like, this guy can't even make up his mind whether this thing's going to destroy the Earth or whether you need to achieve AGI in the next 6 months, and Elon clapped back and they went back and forth. But yeah, simply the idea that Elon isn't sure whether he wants to accelerate AI or sort of decelerate it and do it safely. It's an interesting question to see which way xAI will move. Companies like Atlassian, Quora, and 7,000 others use Vanta to build trust and prove security in real time. Automate compliance and start scaling your business today. Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast. So maybe, Emil, is a good place to sort of segue. You mentioned in passing, we don't have to go deep into this, but Google's got its AI-generated search results, and it's been copping a bunch of heat for some really nonsensical results, most of which are very funny, like the suggestion that you should use glue to stick cheese to pizza, that you should eat 1 rock a day. And a lot of these things, can be traced back to trolls on Reddit answering questions years ago in the training data. But it sometimes feels like, well, Google can't win, right? Like they've been getting a lot of criticism for moving too slowly, for missing the boat, for being caught flat-footed on AI. And now they're rolling it more aggressively into their core search product, which is, the golden goose. And they're being criticized for moving too fast and having some rough edges. So is it a valid criticism, or is this just kind of tech media inside baseball and it really doesn't matter?
Google is definitely held to a higher standard than a startup would be, right? Like, that's just how it is. But I also think it is riskier to infuse a product that everyone knows has hallucinations or makes a lot of mistakes into your core money-making machine that everyone uses, not early adopters just use. Your early adopters are early adopters, and they are happy to use other sort of things because by nature, they're sort of seeking new stuff. So to the extent they put these AI summaries in their core product that my mom uses, who's not an early adopter, and they've got these weird things happening, they're going to get mainstream criticism for that. Whereas when it happens on OpenAI or it happens separately on Anthropic or anyone else, like the people who are using that are sort of, the sample selection bias is different,
So just as a quick aside, the issue seems to be it's not really hallucinating. It's actually just taking really terrible results from the web and putting them in its answers, right? And so it's nearly like if old Google with the 10 blue links just put a really bad result as the number one result. But because it's a sort of AI-generated answer coming...
Yeah, so then I don't know what to call that.
The point is, if they're only giving one answer and it's coming straight from Google, I think the expectation is that it's always right. Whereas if you go to a shitty link, you're like, well, it's a shitty link. But Emil, I feel this is classic innovator's dilemma, right? Where Google needs to catch up, or they will have their lunch cut by folks like Perplexity and who knows, by xAI, whoever else moves into their space. But then if they try to do that, they eat into their own margins, they make their core product potentially worse for a time, and they get criticism for that. But I think they've actually been shocked into action. They've basically come to the conclusion internally that if Google search gets worse for a little while, in order to make the transition to being LLM driven, then they will take their medicine and they will fix forward. That seems to be their approach.
Independent of whether it was a hallucination or bad data, they're going to get criticized more because they're Google. They've been around longer, they're a brand. And the average person who shows up that site is the average person. It's not the early adopter. So their mistakes are going to be more pronounced relative to the average expectation. Whether they do that and eat their own lunch inside their, I do generally believe you're right, that this is all a threat to their core business. Where to place these innovations and how to test, how to self-disrupt, I don't know. That's like a question I haven't thought through fully. Is this the best way to do it? Maybe. Or is it a separate app like that just like looks like OpenAI's app that's like a totally separate thing? I don't know.
It's a really interesting question.
But they've chosen to do it this way. And you're right. Like if I were them, I'd be trying it all. And if this doesn't work, I'd pull it down in 2 months.
Or pull it back, right?
Yeah, pull it back. Right. Sure. Like whatever it is, they should be in this mode and it's okay to fail. And if I was Sundar, I would tell whoever came up with this answer, I'd like, it's okay to fail. Fine. Sucks that we got the Reddit bad data. Keep going. Let's get better. Let's keep going.
And the only other thing I'd say is Google answers trillions of searches a day. And so even if the error rate is very low, you're going to get some shit results. And that's true for web results as well. So, I guess what's not easy to tell from these anecdotal reports of like these ridiculous answers is how prevalent is it? Is it very rare? Is it quite common? That I don't know. But like when you're doing trillions of results a day, you're always going to be able to find some funny shit in there. So I don't know.
Which is why they're held to a higher standard. It's fun to take the one wrong thing and put it on Twitter and it goes around. It's not that fun to do that with OpenAI. Just isn't.
We're saying the same thing. Like they're willing to suck this up. Their public response to this is like, yep, we're aware of these things. We're working on fixing it. So they're not taking a step back right now. They're just like, this is how it goes. So it's going to be interesting to see, but definitely the world's changing. So, Emil, I wanted to pivot a little bit. We talk a lot about AI, and that's not because this is the AI show, but if you talk about news and tech, then you are, by definition, the AI show right now, because that's where all the interesting stuff is happening. You're a quite experienced investor. How do you think, as an investor, about AI and how it affects your investment thesis, your investment decisions? And, if a founder is thinking about this and trying to understand how investors are thinking about potentially their company and their approach, like what would your advice be?
Well, let's at least try to simplify the answer to that question. It's a rough simplification and say like, okay, there's companies that are AI native, so to speak, meaning because of the advancement in LLMs, these companies now have a reason to exist or something to build on that wouldn't have been possible before that, right? Let's call that AI native. And then let's say there's actually a company now that because of AI can do something faster, better, cheaper than they were doing it before. So category one has been where there's been a lot of valuation, inflation, excitement, and a lot of competition is starting to enter. And there's way more uncertainty. Like, are the foundation model companies going to actually subsume all the value, or are they going to have like an application like ecosystem that's going to thrive or not, right? That question is still being debated. And then you have these like crazy fast blowups like Inflection AI that raised $1 billion and very quickly decided like, actually, this is not going to work standalone. Let's sell to Microsoft. We've had very quick blowups in the sector and very quick markups. So this sector is very uncertain. So I do think we're entering into the second part of the early phase of the AI investment in the AI native investment cycle, where as so many companies are being started or trying to get a piece of this, like I can't tell you how many AI like legal companies I've seen, AI healthcare, AI customer care, propping up out of nowhere. So you're going to now start to see, well, how are you different than the other 5 that I've just seen talking about healthcare AI being a $100 billion company, and how are you going to get 5% of that, right? So you're starting to see the subsectors getting crowded in those spaces. Not the LLM, not like I need to raise $10 billion, I'm xAI, I'm OpenAI, I'm Anthropic. I'm talking about other companies down here. So I do think defensibility, differentiation is now an important question for the venture capital community and the AI native ecosystem in a way that is real. And if I were a founder thinking about like, oh my God, I got to get in the AI, like, okay, great. Now we're post sort of, I'll just throw money at anything AI. Now we're sort of get into like, well, what part of AI and why are you different? And how much money do you need? And what, blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of my current state of the union.
And are you investing in those sorts of companies? I think that's an interesting thing. Like you mentioned, yes, forget about 5. We're talking about 50, 500 AI, healthcare AI, legal discovery, AI, customer support startups happening, right? Like, are you investing in some of these? Like, is it actually possible for these companies to differentiate themselves from this vast amount of competition?
I mean, I'm an advisor to Perplexity. I think they have a differentiated product approach. I like a few of them, but I've been very picky because I'm not a VC. When I invest, it's like my money. I'm like, I don't, spray and pray. So because I'm like intellectually not settled on the answers in this space yet, I haven't been deploying tons of capital yet.
From an investor point of view, it is so difficult to make these calls. When it's such a crowded space, what you know is there will probably be a couple of big winners, but everybody else is going to get crushed along the way. You've got a large cohort and only a very small number of possible winners in the space. And so as an investor, I'm pretty small time, but I have a lot of trouble investing in those sorts of companies because it's nearly impossible to differentiate yourself in a robust way at the moment. I think if you're a founder, Emil, like your advice is spot on. So first of all, if you're in one of these crowded spaces, think to yourself, can I niche down and really own a part of this space and build some sort of defensibility around a subset? Or perhaps consider going into a less crowded space. And I think this is sort of when you talk about AI native, I guess the obvious comparison here is like to mobile native. And of course, you were at Uber from very early on. I think that's a great example of a mobile native startup that couldn't exist until we had phones with GPS on them. But the first wave of mobile native, it was the really obvious things, right? And it's like, if you think, okay, we've got this new technology, what can we do that's really obvious? Everyone's going to converge on the same things. And then it's going to be really hard to win. The second wave, of which I would argue Uber is a part, is like, okay, we understand this technology in more depth and we're applying innovative thinking to explore solutions that simply couldn't exist before. But you're still starting from the point of view of like, not, oh, we're a mobile native company, how can we use mobile? But like, what's a problem we're trying to solve? And mobile enables new possibilities. So I guess I'd really encourage startups who are excited by AI and LLMs not to let that excitement carry you away to just the most obvious solution, and really to sort of think more about customers and problems and take, the standard startup advice around really understanding your customers and finding a niche and building defensibility. I don't think a new technology like this changes the laws of startup gravity, right? And I think it's easy to think, oh, okay, now I can just, create a simple wrapper that adds a lot of value. But then if you can, everyone else can too. And I think that's the problem.
Okay.
All right, Emil, I think that's the pod. Thanks as always for joining, and see you next week. Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. To sell to the enterprise, proving security is essential. Vanta allows you to breeze your way through to SOC 2, ISO 27001, or Essential 8 compliance and unlock major growth for your company. Go to vanta.com/TSP today. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to claim your $1,000 off.